Black Plague was brought to all of Afro-Eurasia through trade routes, conflict, and the food supply carried by Yersinia pestis in fleas on rats. The Mongols had gained control of the Silk Road trade through their conquest of much of Asia, establishing the Khanate of the Golden Horde, Chagatai Khanate, the Il Khanate, and the Yuan dynasty. After centuries of uncertainty on the trade routes due to groups of bandits, the Silk Road was finally secure. The Mongols' top priority was to maximize trade because they were able to tax the goods such as silk and spices that passed. Along with the exchange of goods through the secure trade routes, disease had also spread approximately 2 kilometers a day. Medieval Europe was ideal for spreading the bubonic plague. The cities were dirty, the dwellings were cramped, and sanitation and waste management were non-existent. 25% of children would not make it past their first year, and 12.5% of children would not make it through the next 3 years. The Black Death peaked in Europe between 1347 and 1350, with 30 to 50% of the entire population killed. It took 150 to 250 years for the European population to recover. The time period was interspersed with famine. The majority of Europeans were peasants, indebted, farming for their landlords through the feudal system. The knights and lords promised to protect them as long as they continued to plow under the harsh conditions on the farm, because they had to pay rent to the landlord and tithe to the church. Generations of families lived on the same area of land, remaining indebted with few options in every aspect of life. The lifestyle of medieval Europeans was difficult, and the majority of the population were peasants and had a difficult time improving their social status in any way. The central part of the peasant's life was the church. The priests conducted all of the rites for the people. Rites of passage such as marriage, adoption, and coming of age, rites for the community, and rites of devotion. When the Black Death struck, the population looked immediately to the church for an explanation. They watched as millions of their neighbors perished, following a gruesome struggle against the disease, sporting huge buboes in the fingers, groin, neck, and armpits. The relatives that took care of their family members would soon be infected as well. Whole villages would be wiped out in days. It is estimated that around 25 million Asians died from it before it reached Constantinople in 1347. The estimated death toll in Europe was around 50 million people, or more than 60% of the population. Death had previously been seen as a welcome sign, a bridge to eternal life. But because of the widespread dying, many cities forbade the ringing of church bells which honor the dead in order to not discourage the sick. Bishops and clerics ultimately decided to halt this practice. Many of the sick sought refuge at monasteries and quickly infected many members of the clergy. Eventually, church lands and buildings could not be maintained because there were too few priests. More than half of parish priests who gave the final sacraments to the dying died as well, so there definitely were not enough priests to maintain the old service schedules. The church attempted to find replacements, but it was a long and arduous process, and many of candidates died before they could assume their posts. Those who assumed a post were inexperienced and received much criticism. Ironically, this shortage of priests led to more opportunities for women in the church, and they began to hold more extensive and important service roles in the local parish where they had previously been viewed entirely as subservient and often owned by the men who attended church. Priests began to target various outside groups, such as Jews, foreigners, beggars, pilgrims, and lepers. In addition, they turned to astrological forces and decided to accuse Jews of poisoning the wells. Most people, however, believed that only God's anger could cause such horrible displays of sickness. Flagellants also attempted to atone for their sins. They wanted to shorten the time in which they would suffer from God's wrath. However, these Europeans probably had a sense that the world was coming to an end and none of their individual actions could change the consequences. As artists saw many in their community perish, they moved away from purely depicting pieces of Jesus, the Virgin Mary, and stories from the Bible. Instead, many artists, such as Michael Wolgemuth, produced pieces like The Dance of Death, which was depicted an allegory on the inevitability of death. Many also shifted to painting tragedies of the Black Death. These writers and artists encountered death and came to view it in a new light. Writers also used the plague as an opportunity to expand and explore different poetry or writing styles. Here is a passage from Giovanni Boccaccio. How many valiant men How many fair ladies breakfast with their kinfolk in the same night, supped with their ancestors in the next world? The condition of the people was pitiable to behold. They sickened by the thousands daily and died unattended and without help. Many died in the open street, others dying in their houses, made it known by the stench of their rotting bodies. Consecrated churchyards did not suffice for the burial of the vast multitude of bodies, which were heaped by the hundreds in vast trenches like goods in a ship's hold and covered with a little earth. This description shows the change in morale. Some Europeans were beginning to question the firmness of the church as they watched the supposedly most powerful and connected people to the heavens, preachers, perish as well. Additionally, the survivors experienced a huge improvement in their lives. They could finally emerge from their poverty-stricken lives of the feudal ages because the demand for work was so high and there were so few laborers. Otherwise, many of these peasants would have remained and continued the cycle of poverty, indebtedness to their landlords, and total reliance on the church. After the Black Death, European survivors experienced a golden age of new opportunities. Wages increased and land also became plentiful because the disease was indiscriminate, killing many landowners and knights. The age of serfdom and manorialism was coming to an end. There was now more land and food available because there was a smaller population and less competition. Due to the Black Death, there was increased social mobility. Urban workers also saw a rise in their wages. As many people saw their opportunities increase, they were not as reliant on the church for their everyday activities. The church still remained heavily involved in their lives, but people had more free time and were able to explore more activities and specialize in their craft. As a result, not as much time was devoted to the church. They began to explore and experience new ways of life that would have previously been impossible. The decline in interest of the church by no means occurred immediately, but as workers achieved higher wages, many were able to access and purchase things that were previously only available to the super rich, aristocratic, or noble few. However, most of the new arts were commissioned by rich families heavily involved in trade. This was in contrast to artwork commissioned mostly by the church prior to the Black Death. As churches witnessed their power decline, rich families, especially in Italy, drew huge amounts of wealth by trading for Asian goods with merchants from the Ottoman Empire. Eventually, these families would dominate government and establish banks like the Medici family. They commissioned many Renaissance artists, such as Michelangelo, and hired scientists like Galileo Galilei to tutor their kids. Their increased wealth and prosperity could not have happened without the huge population demise. As art and learning flourished, new thought and criticism arose through increased trade and encounter. Reformers like Martin Luther explored the origins of faith and predetermination. He was aided by the spread of technology such as the printing press from Asia that was refined and further developed by Johannes Gutenberg. The printing press helped him to proliferate his ideas to the wide population. He translated the Bible from Latin and the ancient Greek to German, the language of the common people. This allowed more people to explore the true words and develop their own meaning from the important text. Many people questioned the validity and the authority of the church leadership, which would have been absolutely impossible 150 years ago prior to the Black Death. The questions that arose led to many branches to break off from the Catholic Church. People desired to find and use evidence to justify their conclusions and did not merely accept God's wrath as an explanation. Ultimately, the Black Death became a fertilizer for thought and planted the seed for modern secular thinking.